prepare the hate comments. It's finally time that I do this Revolver. Wow. An Audio-Technica and new speakers? It really is Christmas. But that means... Let's do this.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
Welcome back everyone to another episode of Record Reviews. Today I'm doing a record that I've been trying to do for so long, since June actually. I'm talking about Revolver by the Beatles, but first I just want to talk about one thing. You can stop with the hate comments on my stereo system, because now I have an Audio-Technica LP60. It's not 120, but you know, it's in my price range. And I also now have two new speakers. They are Edifier. I don't know if that's a good brand or not, but they sound great. It looks great, it plays great, so you can stop yelling at me about it. Still not satisfied with my setup? Well, just go away, because I don't need your negativity. Now, when it comes to Revolver, it's one of those albums that you gotta listen to over and over again to really understand it and to really enjoy it, pretty much. Now, it's not the greatest Beatles album ever, even though I've listened to it about 10 times for this review. My favorite Beatles album would still be Abbey Road. But it's not the worst album ever. Anyways, Revolver is probably my fourth favorite Beatles album. Here's all of them listed and ranked for your convenience. Now you may leave a hate comment. Now, a quick history on the Beatles. In 1966, the Beatles stopped performing entirely in front of a live audience. They had recorded so many albums, 2 movies, and performed a bunch of shows all around the US and even the world. Now that they remained in the studio, they decided to get creative, and this album really shows their creativity. They decided to get a little experimental with their sound, and it even comes out to be one of the first psychedelic rock albums. One of the first. And speaking of pet sounds, according to the movie Love and Mercy, Mike Love and the rest of the Beach Boys asked Brian Wilson how they would actually perform all of the songs off of Pet Sounds live. Since they were so experimental, they wouldn't know how to play them live. Now, while that was a problem for the Beach Boys, the Beatles decided to just do whatever they wanted since they weren't going to perform them live anyways. Side note, I have this little theory that years divisible by 11 are mostly the greatest years in music, if you'll just allow me. In 1955, we had stars like Elvis, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, and more that came out with a bunch of great singles that really shaped the whole rock and roll sound. In 1966, we had albums like Revolver and Pet Sounds, possibly even more albums from different artists. In 1977, many great albums came out like Out of the Blue, Rumors, Animals, News of the World, Book of Dreams, that one ABBA album that nobody remembers, and lots more. 1988, the trend sort of goes a little cold, but Traveling Wilburys Volume 1 came out. There was also Rattle and Hum, Open Up and Say Ah, the worst AC/DC album ever, etc., etc. And then I just got lazy and I didn't want to look up any of the albums for 1999, but you know, the trend goes. So without further ado, you guys have been waiting since June for this album, so I finally bring you my review of Revolver. TAXMAN. Now, what a great album intro. Now, let me clear up a little bit of speculation about this. First of all, this does seem like a political song, but it's a bunch of British stuff, so nobody really cares. But let's talk about the count-off really quick. The slow one that you hear in the beginning, that's of course George Harrison, but that was actually added in later whenever the song was already done. Well, the instrumental track, of course, whenever they were overdubbing the vocals, George Harrison decided to throw in that count-off. Now, if you hear in the background, you can hear actually Paul McCartney really count off the song in the background. But, you know, count-offs. It's only the most iconic part of the song. It might be the most iconic part of this album besides Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine. But still, it's a great song. Maybe Minilad should use this song as his GTA 5 character TAXMAN's theme song, but you know, he doesn't really like to use that character anymore, so maybe he won't. That's just my opinion.
Look at all the lovely people.
One day in my music theory class, we decided to have a listening day in which we would bring in music and we would listen to it. Not really analyze it, it was just really for fun, and so I brought in Revolver. And then when ELEANOR RIGBY started, everyone just like threw their heads back and just basked in the great stuff that is this song. And it's a fantastic song. Not a single Beatle plays on the song. It's mainly just a string quartet, which was arranged by the late George Martin, and vocals mainly by Paul McCartney. And they're pretty fascinating vocals as well. Overall, the song's just fantastic. I'm only sleeping. While I am aware that a lot of people really love this song, I don't really see it. I was never really a big fan of the Beatles' experimental ideas, but mostly from Sgt. Pepper's, if you guys remember. But this song, you know, while it's not too bad, you can actually hear some of the experimental sounds that they're using here, like reverse and stuff like that. Overall, I think it's a fine song, but, you know, I don't really see what the big deal is with people really loving it, but I can see why people enjoy it. If you see my Sgt. Pepper's review, you would remember that my main problem with the album was I didn't really like the Indian music style that George Harrison was using most of the time. And right here, you can tell once again, you know, he's trying to use that Indian sound, and I don't like it that much. Well, again, I do enjoy their ideas of experimentation, it's just this isn't really my style of music. And it's stuff like this that make this album and Sgt. Pepper's not so high on my list.
Here, making each day of the year.
Now when it comes to Here, There, and Everywhere, I don't really know what to make of it. Is it just Paul McCartney being Paul McCartney, or is this some kind of experimentation? But don't get me wrong, I really love this song. The lyrics are fantastic. I especially love the last stanza, I want her everywhere, especially the line, to love her is to need her. That's such a powerful line in my opinion, and it's one of the main reasons why Paul McCartney is my favorite songwriter. You know, he just works. When it comes to love songs, Paul McCartney is really the go-to person to, you know, get examples from. You know, it's like they say, John was the soul, Paul was the heart, George was the spirit, and Ringo was the drummer. Sorry, mate. But still, with the idea that Paul is the heart, you know, he wrote so many love songs for the Beatles, and even wrote a lot of love songs in the future, such as on Band on the Run, or in the entire Wings anthology. Overall, I think Here, There, and Everywhere is a fantastic love song. It's just a fantastic song in general. It's one of the main reasons why Revolver is number 4 on my list of ranked Beatles albums.
We all live in a yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow submarine.
You know, I was talking to someone the other day about songwriting, and they said they wanted to take a break from writing love songs and instead just wanted to write something that's so out of the blue or just something so outside of the box. And he used Yellow Submarine as an example, and he makes a good point. It's a big reason why Tuba Vaseline Yellow Submarine is such a good song, because it's so out of the blue, it's so experimental. In fact, I really enjoy the sound effects on this, and the main vocal work on the submarine workers part is mostly done by Paul McCartney, a voice actor as well. Who knew? A common misconception among Beatles fans is that if someone sings it, that means that song is theirs, which leads to a common error of idea that this song is Ringo's song. While he does sing it, he did not write it. It's just another Lennon-McCartney pen tune. In fact, the only song in the entire Beatles catalog that Ringo Starr did write was Don't Pass Me By on the White Album. It's about at this point on the album that I sort of realized that John Lennon's really going experimental on this entire album, and especially on this song, I'm Only Sleeping. I mean, they're very similar songs, and it really shows how John Lennon is really trying to get experimental with this album. And I think as the album goes on, I sort of hear hints of Revolution 9, which we all know how that turned out on the Y album. Another thing on She Said, She Said on this album that you realize in John Lennon's voice is John Lennon hated his voice, and he always insisted that the engineers double track his vocals. One of the prime examples is This Boy, which is one of their early songs, and of course this song right here. You can definitely tell how he's double tracked, and if you really listen to John Lennon's vocals on a lot of the songs, see, what was that song on Hard Day's Night? Well, I don't really remember, but there are very rare cases when John Lennon actually goes single track on his voice, and he probably didn't want that to happen, but sometimes it would just happen anyway, probably without a supervision, really.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine.
Side 2 opens with Good Day Sunshine, and this really reminds me of Come With Me by the Idle Race on their second album. Take a listen.
Come with me. It's all so easy for me to see.
And of course, I enjoy that song a lot more than this one, mostly because Jeff Lynne wrote it. This is also a lot like Good Morning on the Sgt. Pepper's album, and it's really just a transition from one side to the other, or from song to song. It doesn't really do a lot for me, it's just mostly filler.
That you got everything you want, and your bird can sing, but you don't get me.
And Your Bird Can Sing is actually a very good song. My one issue with it is, well, I actually don't have that many issues with it. The instrumental breaks are good. In fact, a lot of the instrumental breaks between lyrics on this album are fantastic. But that's also a common trend, and, you know, trends on an album, you know, it really just gets repetitive over time. But the guitar riff on this song is a really good riff, and a lot of the pieces of the song do go together, but it's not necessarily a song that I would want to listen to over and over again. In fact, it's one of those songs that you can listen to it once and go, okay, that was a good song. Do you want to listen to it again? No?
No sign of love behind the tears cried for no one. A love that should have lasted years.
Now, I read somewhere on Wikipedia that For No One is a McCartney song that really shows his maturity in songwriting. And this is actually kind of a mature song. Not in terms of like language or anything, but in terms of subject matter. And it's a really powerful song if you think about it. It's got sort of like a Baroque pop feel to it that becomes even more apparent in the White Album as well. In fact, a lot of the Beatles stuff in this album, Sgt. Pepper's, really come together and sort of break the camel's back on the White Album, and then they go sort of to their roots back in Abbey Road and Let It Be, but it all really began here. And then, of course, they would try to continue this stuff on stuff like Magical Mystery Tour and Yellow Submarine, but eventually it just leads back to Abbey Road and Let It Be.
Being my friend, I said you called Dr. Robert.
For some reason, whenever I listen to Dr. Robert, it makes me think of Dear Doctor on the Rolling Stones' Beggar's Banquet album. I don't really know if it's one of those things that's just like, if the title has Doctor in it, that I immediately think that it's a totally different song, but that does happen. Songs can be very similar, like In My Life by the Beatles and All My Life by ELO. You know, they're not the same song, but they have similar titles. So, misconceptions, am I right? But overall, Dr. Robert is a good sort of rock tune, but like And Your Bird Can Sing, it's not one that's necessarily memorable. This is another problem that I had with Sgt. Pepper's, is the songs aren't exactly memorable. And of course, they're not really hits. You enjoy them for what they are, but they're not necessarily songs you want to play over and over again.
I want to tell you that it's filled with things to say.
When you use GarageBand as much as I have, you start to notice in many songs how similar certain sounds are to the software equipment. And the guitar here, especially in the opening, it sounds a lot like the tremolo guitar on an old version of GarageBand. And that really bothered me whenever I first listened to this. I was like, oh god, not this sound again, because I was getting tired of it. But overall, the song isn't that bad. It is kind of experimental. It's another one of those cases when they're trying to be experimental. And I see how people would enjoy it, but I don't necessarily enjoy it that much.
Hard to get you into my life.
Once again, GarageBand sounds. The horns on here do sound like the GarageBand horns. And frankly, I think that the horns here are very excruciating, in my opinion. And after all, it's my opinion. I mean, who cares, right? I owned a Crosley for a year. I mean, why would you ever respect my opinion? But really, though, this song is very good. But I wanted to point something out. Most of the songs on this album don't get that far over 3 minutes. And that's one of my bigger problems with this album. The entire album overall is just like half an hour. So that's pretty short considering today's terms of music. Mostly albums these days go from 40 minutes to over an hour. But then of course a lot of people don't press on vinyl, otherwise they would stick to just 40 minutes. But seriously, one problem that I do have with a lot of these songs is they end too soon. Just when you think they're going to go into another verse, it suddenly ends. And especially with this song, when Paul McCartney really gets into it and the horns really start screeching and it really just picks up, it just ends. And you think that there would be more to it, but it just ends. And that's one of my bigger problems with this album and its songs.
Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream.
The final song on the album, titled Thanks to Ringo Starr,
Tomorrow Never Knows,
is probably the most experimental on this album. But in a way that Revolution 9 is the most experimental song on the White Album, I don't enjoy it. I feel like John Lennon here is really just throwing stuff at the wall just to see what'll stick. He throws in as much sound effects as he can, as many effects as he can, as many effects on his voice as he can. Actually, I don't even know if John Lennon even wrote this song. This actually is a pretty fitting ending to the album. It really seals the idea that the Beatles are now a psychedelic rock band and now an experimental band, whereas before, in stuff like Rubber Soul, they were a rock band. Notice how the opening of Revolver is TAXMAN, which is a rock tune, and finally the ending to the album is very experimental, which sort of seals the deal that the Beatles are now a different kind of band. And that was Revolver. Do I hate it? No. There are much worse albums out there. In my opinion, Revolver gets about a 7 out of 10. There are very good high points on this album. In fact, the majority of the album is very good. It's something that when you really listen to it, you get used to it. And you just gotta listen to it over and over again. There's a lot of albums like that, like let's say Tame Impala or something. And it's just one of those albums that you gotta listen to over and over again. Probably Sgt. Pepper's is another one of those albums as well, and I just gave it an unfair rating because I didn't listen to it enough times. And to that one person who commented that I don't have a real stereo system, so I didn't listen to it correctly. But I've listened to this album about 10 times, trying to find every little thing that makes this album good, and I wrote that down. And then I noticed a lot of things that didn't make it good, and I wrote a lot of those down, and that's most of the stuff that I've said here. So a 7 out of 10 because it's the Beatles, and it's really a big turning point in their career from rock band to experimental band. In many cases, such as Paul McCartney, he does sort of stick with his main idea of love songs and the remainder of the Beatles catalog, but still tries to make it experimental like everyone else is trying to do. George Harrison, of course, continued the whole Indian rock sort of feel. John Lennon, of course, kept doing experimental stuff until Revolution 9 came along, and then everyone was just like, okay, it's time to stop. Paul McCartney, in For No One, you sort of get a Baroque pop sort of feel, something like The Last Shadow Puppets. His Baroque pop feel is something that he would continue on through the White Album as well. And then Ringo Starr, he was just the drummer, nobody cares about him. Merry Christmas, everyone. I got a new microphone, I got that new stereo system, I got some CDs, some records as well. I finally got the White Album on vinyl. I hope your guys' Christmases went very well as mine did. Be sure to check out my Discogs page in the description below and let me know what album you want me to do next. It doesn't have to be vinyl at all. It can be CDs, cassettes, etc. But just give me your suggestions and I will try to do them as soon as I can. And yeah, this is David Bell. Stay rockin'. That was a horrible ending. I'll see you guys later.
And in her eyes you see nothing, no sign of love behind the tears cried for no one, a love that should have lasted years.
You know, so you can't blame, what can you say?
What can you say?
Oh, yeah. Tomorrow never knows.